My own son Jake slammed my suitcase shut and threw it onto the porch in the freezing sleet. "You're nothing but a dead weight, Dad," he shouted through the storm. "We can't carry you anymore." At 76, I stood there shivering as ice pellets stung my face, watching my world collapse in the bitter Sacramento winter night. The cold bit through my thin jacket, but it was nothing compared to the ice forming in my chest. This wasn't just abandonment, this was erasure. In that moment, standing in the sleet with nowhere to go, something shifted inside me. The quiet, grateful father they thought they knew was dying in that storm. But Jake had forgotten one crucial thing: I wasn't alone in this world. My sister Helen was still out there, and when she found me under that bridge, everything would change. Sometimes the coldest nights forge the hardest steel, and family bonds run deeper than betrayal. I'm curious, what time is it where you're listening to this? Are you driving to work, lying in bed, or maybe taking a late-night walk like I sometimes do when I can't sleep? Comment below with your current time and what you're doing. Frank's story is about to get intense, and I love knowing you're all experiencing it at different moments around the world. The door slammed behind me with a finality that echoed through the empty street. No neighbors peered through their windows. No one cared about an old man being cast out into the storm. I picked up my soaked suitcase, its weight somehow heavier now that it contained everything I had left in the world. My slippers were already soaked through by the time I reached the sidewalk. Each step sent icy water squishing between my toes. The sleet hadn't let up, if anything. It was getting worse. The streetlights cast eerie halos through the frozen precipitation, making everything look like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept walking, not because I had anywhere to go, but because standing still meant freezing to death. My mind kept replaying Jake's words. Dead weight, as if the 49 years I'd spent raising him, working 2 jobs to put him through college, selling my house to pay his debts, as if none of that mattered anymore. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, the same kid who promised he'd always take care of me when I got old. Now here I was, 76 years old, walking through a storm that made those childhood thunderstorms look like gentle rain. My legs were giving out by the time I spotted the overpass. Highway 1 stretched above me like a concrete shelter, and beneath it, the Carmel River gurgled in the darkness. It wasn't warm, but it was dry. That had to count for something. I dragged my suitcase under the bridge and sat down on the cold concrete. The sound of cars passing overhead was oddly comforting. At least I wasn't completely alone in the world. I pulled my thin jacket tighter and tried not to think about how I'd ended up here. But the thoughts came anyway. Lisa's cold eyes when she whispered in Jake's ear. The way they'd been having hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room. The legal documents I'd caught glimpses of on their kitchen table. This hadn't been a sudden decision born of frustration. This had been planned. They wanted me gone, and they wanted it to look like I'd left on my own. A crazy old man who couldn't handle living with family anymore. But I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't going to disappear quietly into the night like they hoped. The sleet kept falling, and somewhere in the distance, I heard footsteps approaching through the storm. 3 hours passed like an eternity. I sat there, shivering against the concrete wall, listening to the sleet hammer the ground around me. My watch had stopped working, probably from the cold, but I could feel the night dragging on. Each car that passed overhead sent a brief rumble through the bridge, reminding me that the world kept moving while I sat frozen in place. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps approaching through the storm. They were deliberate and careful on the slick pavement. I tensed, pulling my suitcase closer. At my age, alone under a bridge in the dead of night, I was an easy target for anyone looking for trouble. But when the figure emerged from the storm, my heart nearly stopped. Frank? The voice was unmistakable, even after all these years. Helen stepped into the dim light, cast by the distant street lamp, her silver hair plastered to her head by the sleet, her coat soaked through. At 71, my little sister still moved with the same determination that had carried her through life. Helen? I struggled to my feet, hardly believing what I was seeing. What are you doing here? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she knelt down beside me, brushing the wet hair from my face with hands that shook not from cold, but from anger. I got a call around midnight, she said simply. Someone I know saw you walking in the storm. They were worried. That was Helen. Even living 3 hours away in Carmel, she still had people watching out for family. She'd always been the networker, the one who stayed connected to everyone and everything. Jake threw me out, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. I know. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. I've been driving for 3 hours to find you. Help me get you to the car. She picked up my suitcase without waiting for permission and started walking. I followed, my legs unsteady on the icy ground. Her car sat running at the edge of the underpass, heat pouring from the open door like a promise of salvation. "Get in," she said, tossing my suitcase into the trunk. "We're going home." "Helen, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm telling." She slammed the trunk shut and fixed me with the same look she'd given bullies in our childhood. "You're my brother. This is what family does." I slid into the passenger seat, and the warmth hit me like a physical embrace. Helen climbed behind the wheel and immediately cranked the heat higher. She reached into the back seat and pulled out a thermos. "Coffee," she said, unscrewing the cap. Still hot, I took the cup with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The coffee was perfect strong, with just a hint of cream, exactly how she'd remembered I liked it. The first sip sent warmth spreading through my chest, and for the first time since Jake's door slammed behind me, I felt human again. "Where are we going?" I asked as she pulled onto the empty highway. "Carmel. I've got a place there now, right by the ocean. You'll like it." She glanced at me, her eyes soft in the dashboard light. "Frank, what Jake did tonight, it's not going to stand. You understand that, right?" I didn't know what she meant, but something in her tone told me Helen had already started planning. My little sister had grown up to become a force of nature, and now that force was aimed at protecting me. "I don't want to be a burden on you two," I said quietly. Helen laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Burden? You think I've forgotten everything you did for us growing up? Jake made a mistake tonight. He thinks you're weak, that you'll just disappear quietly. He has no idea what he's unleashed." The highway stretched ahead of us, leading towards something I couldn't yet imagine. In the rearview mirror, Sacramento disappeared into the storm. The drive to Carmel took another 2.5 hours through winding coastal roads. I dozed fitfully against the passenger window, waking periodically to see Helen's determined profile in the dashboard light. She drove with the same focused intensity she brought to everything in life. When we finally pulled into her driveway, dawn was breaking over Monterey Bay. I stepped out of the car and immediately understood why Helen had chosen this place. The house sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, with cypress trees framing a view that belonged on a postcard. Even in my exhausted state, I could tell this oceanfront property was worth at least $3 million, the kind of place most people only dreamed of owning. "Welcome home," Helen said, grabbing my suitcase from the trunk. The interior was everything I'd expected from my successful sister: tasteful furniture, original artwork on the walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows that brought the ocean right into the living room. But what struck me most was how quiet it was. After years of Jake and Lisa's constant bickering, the peace felt almost foreign. "The guest room is upstairs," Helen said, leading me down a hallway lined with family photos. "But first, you need dry clothes and a hot shower." 20 minutes later, wearing a borrowed bathrobe and feeling human again, I found her in the kitchen making scrambled eggs. She'd changed into jeans and a sweater, her silver hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger. "Eat," she commanded, sliding a plate across the granite counter. "Then we talk." The eggs were perfect, just like everything else Helen did. As I ate, she poured herself coffee and settled across from me with a manila folder I hadn't noticed before. "Frank, I need you to understand something," she began, her voice taking on a businesslike tone. "What happened last night wasn't spontaneous. Jake and Lisa have been planning this." She opened the folder and spread out several documents. Bank statements, legal forms, property records, all with my name on them. "I've been keeping an eye on your finances for years," she continued. "Call it sisterly concern. 3 months ago, Jake started making inquiries about power of attorney. Last month, Lisa contacted a lawyer about elder care options. They've been building a case that you're incompetent." The eggs suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth. "They want to have me declared mentally unfit." "Exactly. And throwing you out in a storm? That was supposed to be evidence of your erratic behavior. They probably expected you to end up in a hospital or shelter, looking confused and helpless." I set down my fork, my appetite gone. "So what do we do?" Helen's smile was sharp as winter steel. "We get ahead of them. I've already called my lawyer, Carol Davis. She's driving down from San Francisco this afternoon. We're going to set up legal protections they can't touch." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Frank, you're not the helpless old man they think you are. You're going to fight back. And you're going to win." For the first time since Jake slammed that door, I felt something other than despair. Sitting in my sister's kitchen, looking out at the endless Pacific, I felt the first stirring of hope, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of anger. Carol Davis arrived at 3 o'clock sharp, just as Helen had promised. She was a woman in her early 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of confident handshake that told you she didn't lose cases often. Her briefcase looked like it could survive a nuclear war. "Frank," she said, settling into Helen's living room with the ocean view behind her, "your sister has filled me in on the situation. What your son is attempting is called elder financial abuse, and it's a felony in California." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "The good news is that we can build a fortress around your assets that Jake and Lisa will never be able to breach. The bad news is that we need to move fast." Over the next 2 hours, Carol walked me through a legal strategy that was both elegant and ruthless. First, we would establish a revocable living trust, with Helen as the successor trustee. Then we would create what she called the Miller Foundation for Senior Rights, a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting elderly people from family exploitation. "This is brilliant," Carol explained, spreading the paperwork across Helen's coffee table. "By transferring your assets to the foundation, you maintain control during your lifetime. But Jake can never touch them. Even if he somehow gets a conservatorship order, the foundation's assets are protected." Helen poured us all coffee while Carol continued. "We'll also file a preemptive restraining order. If Jake tries to contact you or interfere with your finances, he'll be in violation of a court order." "How long will this take?" I asked, signing document after document. "The foundation paperwork will be filed tomorrow. The trust documents are effective immediately." Carol smiled grimly. "By the time Jake figures out what we've done, it'll be too late for him to stop it." As the afternoon wore on, I began to understand the scope of what Helen had arranged. She wasn't just protecting me, she was creating a weapon. The Miller Foundation would have real money behind it, enough to help other elderly people facing similar situations. My personal tragedy was becoming something larger. "There's one more thing," Helen said as Carol packed up her briefcase. "I want Frank to be completely financially independent. No one should ever be able to use money as leverage against him again." Carol nodded. "I've prepared transfer documents for $2 million from Helen's accounts to the foundation. Frank will have full access as the primary beneficiary, but the money is legally untouchable by anyone else." $2 million. I stared at my sister in shock. "Helen, I can't accept." "You're not accepting charity," she interrupted. "You're accepting justice. Jake threw you away thinking you had nothing. Let's show him how wrong he was." That evening, as Carol drove back to San Francisco with a briefcase full of signed documents, I stood on Helen's deck watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. Tomorrow, Jake would probably try to contact me. He'd want to work things out or talk reasonably, but he had no idea what was waiting for him. The fortress was built. Now we just had to wait for the siege to begin. Jake's phone call came exactly 1 week later. His voice was different, softer, almost pleading. "Dad, I've been worried sick about you. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. Lisa and I were under stress, and we said things we didn't mean. I let the silence stretch between us, watching the ocean from Helen's deck. We need to talk, face to face," he continued. "Family is family, right? We can work this out." 2 days later, Jake and Lisa appeared at Helen's front door. Both were dressed formally, and Lisa carried yellow roses, my late wife's favorite. They'd done their homework. "We came to apologize," Jake said when I came downstairs. His arms opened for a hug, but I stayed where I was. "Dad, I'm so sorry. We were completely wrong. You don't know how guilty I've felt." Lisa stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Miller, we've missed you so much. The house feels empty without you." For an hour, they performed beautifully. Jake talked about work stress and being a good provider. Lisa spoke about family bonds and taking care of each other. They painted themselves as overwhelmed children who'd made a terrible mistake. "We've been seeing a counselor," Lisa added. "She says communication is key. We want to rebuild our relationship with you." "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. Jake and Lisa exchanged a quick glance. "We thought maybe we could sit down with a mediator," Jake said. "Someone neutral who could help us figure out the best way forward. Make sure everyone's needs are met." "What kind of needs?" "Practical things," Lisa said softly. "Making sure you're safe, that your wishes are respected. Maybe setting up some legal protections so this kind of misunderstanding never happens again." There it was. Even wrapped in therapy language, they were still after control. "We've been thinking maybe we should formalize some arrangements," Jake continued. "Healthcare directives, financial planning, just to make sure everything's clear and above board." "You want me to sign papers," I said quietly. "Nothing major," Jake said quickly. "Just basic documents that protect all of us. Show that we're a united family again." I looked at my son, trying to manipulate me with crocodile tears and rehearsed speeches. I need time to think about it, I said finally. Relief flooded Jake's face. Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need. We just want what's best for everyone. They left with promises to give me space, but I knew this was just the opening move in a much larger game. That night, I couldn't sleep. Their performance felt too rehearsed, too polished. Helen found me on the deck at 2 a.m. You saw it too, she said, settling beside me. The way they looked at each other, they've practiced this. Helen called Carol the next morning. Their conversation was brief but intense. When she hung up, her face was grim. Carol thinks we should assume they're already working with an attorney. They seem so sincere, I said. Frank, Jake's construction company filed for bankruptcy 3 months ago, Helen said, showing me her laptop screen. He's drowning in debt. The pieces fell into place. The timeline matched when Jake started those power of attorney inquiries. They don't want reconciliation, I realized. They want access to money. Carol called back that afternoon with chilling news. Jake and Lisa had consulted an attorney about conservatorship proceedings. They've been building a case for months, Carol explained. The bankruptcy, inquiries about your mental state, throwing you out in the storm, all designed to show you're incompetent and their concerned family. So the apology visit was an attempt to get voluntary power of attorney. Much cleaner than court, and it looks like your idea. That evening, Jake called again. Dad, have you thought about our conversation? This time, I was ready. I've decided I don't need any legal arrangements, Jake. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Long silence. Dad, I think you're making a mistake. We're just trying to help. Help yourselves, I interrupted. I know about the bankruptcy, Jake. I know about the attorney. This was never about reconciliation. His voice changed instantly. The fake warmth evaporated. You don't know what you're talking about. You're being manipulated by Helen and her lawyers. What I see is my son trying to steal from me after throwing me out in a storm. This isn't over, Dad. His voice was cold now. You're making a huge mistake. We're your family, and we have legal rights. You lost those rights when you decided I was dead weight. I hung up and turned to Helen. Now what? Her smile was sharp as broken glass. Now we show them what happens when you prey on the Miller family. The war had arrived. The legal papers arrived 3 days later, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic about disturbing our morning coffee. The envelope was thick, official, and carried the seal of Monterey County Superior Court. Emergency petition for temporary conservatorship, the header read in bold letters. Jake and Lisa were asking the court to declare me mentally incompetent and grant them immediate control over my finances and medical decisions. Their evidence was breathtaking in its audacity. They claimed I'd been exhibiting signs of dementia and paranoia, that I'd abandoned my home in a confused state, and that I was being manipulated by outside parties who may not have his best interests at heart. Helen read over my shoulder, her coffee mug trembling slightly. They're claiming I'm taking advantage of you. Carol warned us this might happen, I said, though my voice shook more than I wanted. What followed was a week of legal warfare. Carol filed counter motions faster than Jake's attorney could read them. We submitted my recent medical records, including a comprehensive cognitive evaluation from 3 months earlier, perfect scores across the board. But Jake and Lisa weren't finished. They began calling Helen's neighbors, claiming they were worried about an elderly man who might be confused or in danger. They contacted the Carmel police, requesting a wellness check. They even appeared at the local bank, suggesting I might be a victim of elder abuse. Each move was calculated to create a paper trail supporting their narrative. Frank Miller was a confused old man being manipulated by his scheming sister. The problem was, they'd underestimated both Helen and me. Look at this, Helen said, spreading printouts across her kitchen table. Carol's private investigator had been busy. Jake's been researching conservatorship laws for 6 months. Lisa's been in contact with 3 different elder care attorneys since January. The digital breadcrumbs told the whole story. Email conversations about Dad's declining mental state. Text messages about getting control of his assets before he wastes everything. Bank records showing Jake had been declined for multiple large loans over the past year. They made one crucial mistake, Carol explained during our emergency meeting. They filed false statements with the court. Jake claimed you were found wandering confused in a storm. But Helen has phone records proving she was called by a witness who saw you seeking shelter. That's not confusion, that's survival instinct. Carol's smile was predatory. We also have Jake's bankruptcy filings, which show a clear financial motive. And Lisa's internet search history is particularly damning. She's been researching how to get power of attorney for elderly parents since December. The hearing was set for the following Thursday. Jake and Lisa would have to appear in court and defend their petition with evidence. We would be ready with our own evidence, and it would destroy them. Frank, Carol said as she packed her briefcase, when we walk into that courtroom, we're not just defending your rights. We're going to expose them completely. Their lies, their manipulation, their financial desperation. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the boy who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories. The young man I'd walked down the aisle at his wedding. The son who'd once promised to always take care of me. Then I thought about standing in the sleet, watching my suitcase get soaked while he called me deadweight. Yes, I said firmly. I'm ready, Carol nodded. Good. Because we're not just going to win this case, Frank. We're going to make sure Jake and Lisa never try something like this again. Filing false documents with the court is perjury. Attempting to defraud a senior citizen is elder abuse. Both are felonies in California. As Carol's car disappeared down the coastal highway, I stood on Helen's deck watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring the fight of my life, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly ready. The war was about to reach its climax, and I had the better army. The Monterey County Superior Court was smaller than I'd expected. Nothing like the grand courtrooms on television. Just wooden benches, fluorescent lighting, and the quiet hum of justice moving at its own pace. Judge Patricia Hernandez entered at exactly 9 a.m., her black robes flowing as she took her seat. She was younger than I'd anticipated, with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. Jake and Lisa sat ahead of us with their attorney, David Thompson, a thin man in an ill-fitting suit who kept shuffling papers. Jake wore his only good shirt, and Lisa had on her black funeral dress. Even their clothing felt calculated. This is a hearing on the emergency petition for temporary conservatorship, Judge Hernandez announced. Mr. Thompson, present your case. Thompson stood and began reading in a monotone voice that suggested he'd handled too many of these cases to care anymore. Your Honor, Frank Miller, age 76, has been exhibiting cognitive decline and poor judgment. He abandoned his family home during a severe storm, and we have concerns about his current living situation and outside influence. For 20 minutes, Thompson painted me as a confused old man who'd wandered off and was now being manipulated by my wealthy sister. He submitted old medical records, bank statements showing my erratic spending, and neighbor testimony claiming I'd seemed different. When he finished, Judge Hernandez turned to Carol. Miss Davis? Carol stood with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case she cared about. Your Honor, this petition is built on lies, motivated by greed, and represents textbook elder abuse. She walked to the evidence table and picked up a thick folder. Mr. Miller didn't abandon his home in confusion. He was thrown out by his son during a storm after refusing to sign over power of attorney. We have phone records showing Mr. Miller's sister was contacted by a witness who saw him seeking appropriate shelter, rational survival behavior, not confusion. Carol began laying out documents like playing cards. Furthermore, Jake Miller filed for bankruptcy 3 months ago and has been researching conservatorship procedures for 6 months. His wife has contacted multiple attorneys about gaining control of elderly relatives' assets. Their internet searches include how to prove parent incompetent and conservatorship for financial control. Jake's face turned red. Lisa stared at her hands. Most damning, Carol continued. They filed false statements with this court. They claim Mr. Miller was found, wandering, confused. But phone records prove he was reported by a concerned citizen as appropriately seeking shelter during a storm. Judge Hernandez leaned forward. Mr. Thompson, do you have evidence contradicting these phone records? Thompson shuffled frantically through his papers. Your Honor, the circumstances were. Do you have evidence or not? No, Your Honor. Carol wasn't finished. We also have recent medical evaluations showing Mr. Miller has perfect cognitive function, reasonable financial records, and testimony about his mental acuity. She turned toward Jake and Lisa, her voice hardening. What we have is a son who threw his elderly father out in a storm when the father refused financial exploitation, then attempted to use this court to complete that exploitation through false claims. Objection! Thompson jumped up. Counsel is making accusations. Sustained, Judge Hernandez said, but her eyes remained fixed on Jake and Lisa. However, I'm very concerned about the discrepancies in the petitioner's statements. The judge called a 15-minute recess. When she returned, her decision was swift. The petition for emergency conservatorship is denied. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of possible perjury and elder abuse charges. Jake's face went white. Lisa started crying real tears this time. Mr. Miller, Judge Hernandez addressed me directly. You appear in full control of your faculties and affairs. This court finds no evidence supporting the claims against you. Outside the courthouse, Jake tried to approach me one last time. Dad, please, don't, I said quietly. You made your choice when you threw me out in that storm. Now live with the consequences. As we drove back to Carmel, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete peace. The war was over, and justice had prevailed. But more than that, I'd discovered something about myself. At 76, I wasn't dead weight. I was still fighting, still standing, still capable of protecting what mattered. The boy who once promised to take care of me had tried to destroy me, but he'd forgotten something important. I was Frank Miller, and I didn't break easily, and I'd never felt stronger. 6 months after the courthouse victory, I stood in the Carmel Community Center watching something extraordinary unfold. The Miller Foundation for Senior Rights had grown beyond anything Helen and I had imagined. What started as a legal shield had become a lifeline for elderly people across California. Mr. Miller, a woman in her 70s, approached me, her eyes bright with gratitude. I'm Margaret Chen. Your foundation helped me when my nephew tried to steal my house. Thank you. Stories like Margaret's arrived daily. Seniors who'd been abandoned or exploited were finding their voices again. The foundation provided legal aid, financial protection, and something more valuable, proof that age didn't mean powerlessness. Helen joined me, surveying the room filled with volunteers and supporters. You know what's beautiful? She said. Jake thought throwing you out would make you disappear. Instead, he made you visible to everyone who needed hope. The irony was perfect. My son's cruelest act had become the catalyst for helping hundreds of families avoid the same betrayal. Carol approached with updates. Frank, Jake pled guilty to attempted elder abuse and perjury. 2 years probation and community service. Lisa took a plea deal. They lost their house to bankruptcy. Any contact from them? Helen asked. Nothing, I said. And surprisingly, that didn't hurt anymore. The boy I'd raised was gone. Grieving that loss had been necessary. But so was moving forward. A volunteer handed me a microphone. Mr. Miller, would you like to address everyone? I looked out at the faces, survivors, fighters, people who'd refused to be erased. They reminded me of what I'd learned under that bridge. Sometimes the coldest nights forge the strongest steel. When someone you love treats you like you're disposable, I began, it's easy to believe them. But here's what I learned. Your worth isn't determined by how others value you. It's determined by how you choose to stand up and fight back. I paused, thinking of everyone listening who needed to hear this. Age doesn't make us invisible. Experience makes us dangerous to those who prey on the vulnerable. If you've ever felt discarded or forgotten, know this, you still have power. You still have voice. You still matter. The applause was warm, but more important was the recognition in their eyes. We were all part of the same story, people who refused to disappear quietly. At 76, I discovered something Jake never understood. The strongest families aren't built on blood. They're built on choice, loyalty, and showing up when it matters. That night, standing on Helen's deck watching the Pacific sunset, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace. Not because the pain was gone, but because I'd transformed it into purpose. I was Frank Miller. I'd survived the storm. And I was just getting started. The most powerful betrayal stories often begin with the people who were supposed to protect us. Frank's experience reminds us that when human love fails, God's love remains constant and unchanging. In the midst of his son's rejection, the Lord was already preparing Helen's heart to become an instrument of rescue and restoration. These grandpa stories carry wisdom that our youth-obsessed culture desperately needs to hear. Frank discovered that being discarded by family doesn't diminish your divine purpose, it often reveals it. When Jake saw dead weight, the Almighty saw a warrior waiting to be awakened. The most meaningful betrayal stories aren't about the wounds we receive, but about how we choose to heal and help others heal. Frank's foundation stands as living proof that our greatest pain can become our most powerful ministry. These grandpa stories teach us that experience isn't expiration, it's expertise earned through surviving what others fear to face. His betrayal became the bridge that connected him to hundreds of other seniors who needed to know they weren't alone. The lesson echoes through every generation. God never wastes our pain. He transforms it into purpose, our rejection into redirection, our abandonment into advocacy. Has this story stirred something in your spirit? We want to hear how it's impacted you. Share your thoughts below. If you know someone who needs this reminder of their unshakable worth, be their Helen today and share this message. And if you're ready to join a community that believes your best chapters are still being written, that subscribe button is waiting for you.